Um, so two final questions since we are running out of time. One has to do with hip hop music, since this is a
Sure.
music show. I'm a fan of hip hop. I would assume that you are as well. Um, Two things. While one can appreciate the lyrical master skills of the top MCs, we should be wary of some of the lyrical contents that was featured in the songs. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of sexism. There used to be a lot of racism. I mean, Ice Cube's songs are like filled with anti-Semitic lyrics at one point, and of course the great distrust of cops and at some point white people. And if you listen to, I don't know, Lupe Fiasco, the American credo as a whole. So how can we have this conversation on hip hop without being labeled as, I don't know, tip of war, or some kind of like racist suburban mom who doesn't let her kids listen to Eminem or such?
Yeah, I think that I mean, in terms of hip hop is interesting because hip hop has gotten a complete pass from almost all of the censors in society. I mean, when you look at Me Too, when you look at what Dave Chappelle called the rainbow people, like the very active gay and trans movement, so on. When you look at like the pro-black folks that'll criticize anyone who criticizes black people, I mean, like you can have a record by two rappers who are literally named Black Criminal and the Arab Assassin called like Bitch Killer. And everyone's just like, oh, that's great, dancing along to it. Yeah, it is entertaining. I personally think that as an adult, there's a substantial space for being quote unquote bad, or a female friend might put it as naughty. Like I spend a substantial portion of my days training to kill people. I mean, going to the gun range. And sex is obviously fun. It's a key part of life. If you go to the gym, you're going to listen to loud music about fighting other men. Mostly it's going to be metal, hip hop, punk. I mean, I think there's a perfect place for that if you're an adult. The real problem with hip hop is that young fatherless kids think these dudes are telling the truth. Like I remember listening to hip hop. I was never a drug dealer, but I grew up in a tough neighborhood, and I was very active in kind of the rave scene. Like I'd be my buddies through events and so on. And like I actually know how much drugs weigh and like what they cost. And rappers are almost always wrong. So like I remember when Young Jeezy started referring to himself as Mr. 17.5, implying that he was buying kilos of pure cocaine for 17,000. And it was like, no, you're not. Like it's just not a thing that happens. Do you live near water? Like this is why are you lying like this? But I think that when people who are not aware that this is unreal listen to this stuff, it is very, very problematic. I think, though, the issue is at a higher level because there's lots of music. Like I'm not defending hip hop. Hip hop's the most on this. Hip hop's the most profane. But like if you listen to like Narco Ranchero or metal from the Marilyn Manson era, like Lords of Acid or Cruella style dance pop where the songs have titles like Get Me Wet Again. I mean, like it's very similar content. The real issue is that this is coming down the pike at kids who aren't prepared to deal with it. So the real question is, how do you strengthen families, churches, if you're a religious guy, so on down the line? How do you, in the internet era, actually ensure that people are 18 when they buy this or they buy porn? I mean, I'd favor a basic ID upload system if the company's reputable, and blah, blah, blah. But the music itself, yeah, it's violent and it's mostly about sex. That's not bad if you're an adult. It is a little weird for the kids. That's the one thing. So I guess my first solution is just what I said. I mean, build up fatherhood. It's going to be a tough road, but that's a lot of things like violent video gaming, even moderate drug use are really only problematic if you have no structure in your life. So that providing that structure is what we need to do as a society. We're not actually going to ban Cruella records because they say vagina, let's say, lips in them. We're not going to come up with a series of words like they did in the 1980s that you can't use on a record, probably. Yeah, that's that. Also, I have no hope for these institutions, but it would be nice if the people on the left, from the mainstream media to the censor organizations, were at all consistent. Like, I mean, if I have a recommendation for Me Too. I mean, a fair number of feminists hate follow me. Like why don't you do something about songs with names like Beat That Bitch? Like they're obviously like, I was listening to, I was watching the Memphis Grizzlies Golden State Warriors basketball game the other day, and they were actually playing the censored version of the 666 Mafia song Beat That Bitch from Hustle and Flow. And it was Whoop That Trick. But it was like all the lyrics are like, whoop that trick, beat that prostitute. And all these people in the audience are like waving towels and all this. And it was kind of like, it was insane to see these suburban white and black business women doing this. Like these are the same people that are like leading the sexual harassment trainings, you know, whoop that trick, whoop that trick. The audience is going crazy. So, I mean, I would like to see the groups that are supposed to have something to say about this, not young male fighters, but like the churches, Me Too, so on. I'd like to see them say the obvious. I guess that's my stopgap answer.
Yes. Okay. So final question. Can't believe this has been the most amusing podcast conversations I've had with an academic. So thank you for that.
Academics tend to be fairly dry. Like, I mean, I consider myself as good at nerdy wonkery as almost anybody, but I mean, I was a sales director before this job. And I mean, you have to be able to go out and, you know, talk to clients and drink scotch and so on. So I mean, hopefully some of it survived. Hey, little fella.
I hear that Roland Fryer is also like an exquisitely funny guy too. So final question. The opposite of what I find to be the hip hop ethos is represented by Thomas Sowell, which is mentioned at the beginning of this podcast. I've always found that after, you know, having my mind blown by his books and arguments and hot takes, that I think liberals should read Thomas Sowell more. So which of his many books would you recommend to, say, a liberal friend who just heard of his name?
The book I'd recommend is The Vision of the Anointed, because that so perfectly describes what we're seeing in society today. Sowell's point, this book I think originally dates back to 1999, so he's talking about it as a possibility, and it absolutely came true. But his point is that during sort of the big sort era, we were moving toward a situation in which a very large number of the intelligentsia, which I would define as the people in media, the people in secondary education, the people in higher education, as you get older, make money. I mean, the people in the charities, the NGOs that run so much of adult social life, all of these people were sharing one vision that's extremely marginal in society overall, which he calls the vision of the anointed. But this is essentially the idea that humans are totally plastic, that race is not real, that sex is barely real, that major social change is easily possible in response to things like, frankly, a rather mild disease pandemic, COVID-19, which over 2.5 years killed about 1 million Americans. And that's mostly the second year because most of them chose not to be vaccinated. I mean, you know, of course, terrible, but that social change in response to this sort of thing is extremely possible. It's quick. It has no negative externalities. You sort of shut down the country and then you go back to doing things normally and there'll be no inflation. Mr. Biden said this. I mean, so Tom Sowell points out that many people in the intelligentsia hold to this niche vision, which tends to be linked to ideas like Marxism, Foucauldianism before that, Rousseau's philosophy. And he provides considerable quantitative, you know, exemplage of this in the book. And I think that right now we're in a position where the quote unquote anointed are utterly dominant, not overall, not, you know, in law or something, but in discursive life in America, to the point where something like Fox News is considered extraordinarily hard right, for example. I mean, it's hard right for a media company, but I would say that Fox would be to the left of about 40% of the American population. I mean, you have a very significant you have very significant system control by this group. I guess the main point to take from that book also is Sowell's analysis of kind of the personality type, if you will, of the anointed. One of the points he makes is that this tends to be a very anti-democratic group. The idea is that a certain block of smart people with elite secondary degrees should really make most decisions in society because they have the latest, most up-to-date knowledge. They've read the most recent paper in women's studies. And Sowell's point is that a lot of the knowledge that these people have tends to be trendy, fashionable, very unlikely to have stood the test of time. Marxism, in fact, is an excellent example of this. And that there's much more knowledge contained among smart people like local elites in society who the state would generally be better served to listen to. So anyway, for those reasons and others, I'd recommend The Vision of the Anointed. His book on affirmative action worldwide is much more niche, but is probably the second I would recommend, simply because it illustrates that there are certain patterns of race relations in almost all countries, that allowing equal competition seems to be the best way for people to get along, that federalism works very well, as in Brazil, Indonesia, and racially diverse states, but that simply giving kind of unearned benefits creates this cycle where you get professional hucksters demanding more unearned benefits. I mean, everything, his lessons from, Zainichi Koreans in Japan or Black South Africans or something like that apply equally well to the USA, I think.